Now, I just want to say up front, guys, that I am not a movie critic. This is a book channel, and I do tend to talk about adaptations of books that I really like and kind of how they relate to the book. So do not look at this movie review as like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, because I probably don't. This is just an opinion. I'm going to talk about the book, and then I'm going to talk about the movie and kind of what was different about them. So I'm just glad they finally made a movie out of The Color Out of Space, because I finally get to know what this indescribable color actually looks like. Turns out it's just really pinkish purple. West of the Arkham Hills rise wild, and there are valleys with deep woods that no axe has ever cut. There was really nothing for serious men to do in cases of wild gossip, for superstitious rustics will say and believe anything. It was a scene from a vision of Fuseli, and over all the rest reigned that riot of luminous amorphousness, that alien and undimensioned rainbow of cryptic poison from the well, seething, feeling, lapping, reaching, scintillating, straining, and maligningly bubbling in its cosmic and unrecognizable chromaticism. It was just a color out of space, a frightful messenger from unformed realms of infinity, beyond all nature as we know it, from realms whose mere existence stuns the brain and numbs us with the black extra-cosmic gulfs it throws open before our frenzied eyes. Hey, what's up, bookworms and couch potatoes? Mike here today to talk a little Lovecraft, something we don't get to do enough on this channel. You guys know by now I'm a big fantasy, sci-fi, and horror fan. I've talked about a lot of Stephen King on this channel, but I haven't really talked too much Lovecraft, and I finally am glad that there's some movies and stuff getting in the works and actually coming out so we can talk more Lovecraft, and namely how they go from the page to the screen and kind of the differences. So this is going to be a review for the 1927 story, The Color of Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft. The original story is C-O-L-O-U-R, obviously, and the movie that just came out is C-O-L-O-R. I guess they don't want to get any confusion there about what the color is. But I read from the 2008 collection of the Necronomicon. This really has most of everything he did for Best Weird Tales and a couple from Amazing Stories. I'm planning on doing an author deep dive for Lovecraft soon, and I'll get more into the differences there. But this is a story that's only about 30 pages long. Most of his stuff, not besides the Dunwich Horde, most of his stuff is just, short stories. Even the very famous, probably the most famous to casual fans of Lovecraft is Call of Cthulhu, and even it's only like 28 pages long. So most of these stories, it's kind of like the Robert E. Howard video that I did recently about why I decided to read Conan, and it's very similar in that it's just very quick hits. These are very good tales, but I'll save that for when I actually talk about Lovecraft as a whole. This is about The Color of Space. Now, this is going to be a book and the movie review. Like I said, this is a book channel, so don't take my movie grading skills to heart. I'm not a movie critic. I'm not a book critic. This is just kind of an opinion on this channel. If this is the first time you found me, what I do is I just like to talk about the story and then have a discussion with you guys in the comments. That's really what it's all about. So what I'm going to do for this, I'm going to talk about the book first, The Color Out of Space from 1927, and then the most recent movie that just came out by director Richard Stanley with Nicolas Cage, and that is The Color Out of Space. It came out in 2019, but it's kind of didn't get a worldwide release. It didn't get a very wide release in the States, so it's actually kind of hard to get a hold of. There are some screener copies floating around the internet, and that's how most people are seeing it. But if it's within reach of you to go to the theater, I very strongly urge you to support it, and that way we get more Lovecraft adaptations in the future, because it's something that it's a well that I feel like we haven't went to enough in Hollywood. So I would like to see Hollywood get more Holly weird with some of these tales. And we're off to a good start. So let's talk about the book first. If it sounds very familiar, it's because it's something that has been parodied and tried to be adapted several times before. I believe this is the fourth attempt of this movie. I can't give you the years or the titles. Not all of them were called The Color Out of Space. I believe only the one like in 2010 was called The Color Out of Space. But it is a story of a meteor that crashes onto someone's farmland, and it affects the family in strange and unusual ways. Now, how this book is actually set up is a secondhand telling. What you have is you have your unnamed narrator, who is a surveyor, and he's checking out this land to see if it's right for a new reservoir. And he gets to this really barren area where it's like gray and ashy for like 5 acres. And he finds out from the locals that it is called the Blasted Heath. And people, whenever he tries to talk to them about it, they seem very spooked. They don't want to talk about it. They just, tell him about that it was something from the strange days, as they call it. So no one really wants to talk about it except this old coot named Ammi Pierce. Now, he is willing to talk about it. And that's where you get that this book is a secondhand account of what happened on this farm. So not only do you have maybe necessarily an unreliable narrator here, you got it from a secondhand account. So you always have to kind of take these things into account here. And it's no different here with the story from Ammi, who people already consider, a little baddie. So you kind of got to think, okay, how much of this is real? But again, this is a Lovecraft story. It's always going to kind of feel like this. How much of this is actually happening when it's coming from a secondhand account? That's kind of the moral of the story here. So this meteorite crashes onto the Gardner farm, and it's got this indescribable colors, as Lovecraft puts it. It's this part of this chromatic spectrum, and it's a color that you can't really describe. And that's something I feel like he does a lot in his books. It's something that, like with Cthulhu, is like it was something that is very foreign and like a human cannot actually say. Because so like saying Cthulhu isn't actually the way you actually say it. Even Lovecraft himself said it's almost like kind of like a coughing noise because humans aren't supposed to be able to say it. And I've always found that to be something very, very compelling about his writing, and it makes it even more weird and mysterious, and no different here. So at first it seems like this is kind of a blessing in disguise, because this meteor, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that after a while it starts to actually shrink until it's eventually gone. And obviously, there's like these, I think he calls them like blisters, something like that, that actually get broke off when these professors from a university come to take like samples that like shrink and disappear and melt into a bucket and melt this bucket away. Again, I'm derailing here, but it makes his harvest shows up a little bit soon, and his crops are some of the largest and most plentiful he's ever had, and you're thinking this is a good thing, but then every time they try to eat it, it's too bitter, and then it starts to affect the wildlife. They start to get a little deformed, and eventually they start to get gray and kind of waste away until they're basically just falling apart, and they're brittle and gray and just they're disintegrating. And again, the plant life starts to take on a new life before it eventually gets to a point where it starts to waste away. And obviously you can kind of understand that the soil is poisoned. Obviously everything around it is poisoned. The trees are starting to move on their own, and like they're in the wind, but there is no wind. So that's obviously a creepy visual. But it's when it starts to affect Farmer Gardner's family that things really, really kind of fly off the rails. His wife starts to go a little bit insane. And instead of taking her to the insane asylum, he just decides to lock her in the attic. One of his kids shows the same kind of thing. He locks that kid in the attic. And it's when Ammi actually comes to visit the Gardners when things really, really just kind of go into that whole cosmic horror element that you come to expect from a Lovecraft story. Now, I'm not going to get too into the details here because I don't want to spoil for you what happens in that attic, because things go to crazy town. Especially with the well, things in the well. It really, really just what you come to expect from Lovecraft at this point. And I find it interesting that this is apparently Lovecraft's favorite story that he ever wrote. And you can really see why, because it's just so foreboding and mysterious, and you feel like it's just that sense of dread you get while reading it, that you're just waiting. Oh my God, what is happening, this metamorphosis in this attic? What is in the bottom of this well? And it's done in a very, very grim and exciting. I don't know if exciting is the word because you just kind of want to know what's coming, but then you dread to know it. And I don't feel like it really disappoints. And again, you don't think that in 30 pages you can really get very much. And I said this in the Robert E. Howard one. I feel it's unreal these two authors, what they can get out of 30 pages to really get you connected to the characters, actually caring for them. But I really feel like this is kind of an analysis of how much horror the human mind can take before they just snap. And it's I won't say it's his most horrific. While I feel like most of Lovecraft stuff is really just straight up cosmic tentacle horror, this one has a lot more body horror in it. So if you're kind of squeamish to that kind of things, you probably shouldn't be reading Lovecraft in the first place. But I definitely think that there'll be plenty for you to like in this. So it's a very quick read. I think you'll enjoy it quite a bit. If you haven't read Lovecraft before, I actually think it's much more approachable to start with The Color Out of Space than something like Cthulhu or something like The Dunwich Horror or even Rats in the Walls, maybe. But there's very much an entry point, I think, to Lovecraft. You can get a sense of his style. It builds his mythology a little bit. It brings up Arkham. It brings up all kinds of things that kind of tie into his larger mythos. So obviously, the book, I'm going to give a very high recommend. Again, you can read it in one sitting. I don't think it's a very difficult read. If you're not used to his prose at first, it might be a little tough for you. But again, I'm going to get into this when I do my Why You Should Read Lovecraft. And when I eventually have that done, I'll put it right here. But I don't know when I'm actually going to record that because I'm quite behind on some of my videos right now. But I want to talk about this because I just watched the movie today. I hadn't read the book since high school, so I wanted to read it real fast. And I'll talk about the movie here. And I want to say it's really interesting because just recently I did a video about like 11 series I would like to see adapted from the page to the screen. And one of them I said was I'd like to see them do a shared Cthulhu Mythos Lovecraft universe. And Richard Stanley, apparently, he really wants to do this. Color Out of Space is a project that I first heard about him doing a while back, and then I didn't hear nothing. And then, boom, here it is. And I first saw that, I was like, Nicolas Cage, really? Interesting choice there. And, something about Nicolas Cage I want to bring up for a second. Was he always a bad actor and we just didn't know it in the 90s? I mean, the guy, didn't he win an Academy Award? Here's the thing. Nicolas Cage gets a really bad rep now, and a lot of it's deserved because a lot of his acting is painful. It really is. And I am very easy on the this guy can act, this person can't kind of thing. But I feel like Lovecraft, and especially this story, is zany enough that Nicolas Cage is kind of perfect for it. Because like I said, this is an analysis of how much horror the human mind can take before they just completely go bananas. And I think that Nicolas Cage is kind of, that's where I feel like he's already at. How much criticism can this guy take before he snaps? And so I actually think it was quite a brilliant casting. But back to Stanley in this shared universe. He apparently wants to do this. I believe Elijah Wood is part of this production team. That's an interesting thing. But, hey, Lovecraft has many, many fans. You watch that Fear of the Unknown documentary, and it's basically told by Neil Gaiman, Guillermo del Toro, and John Carpenter. So, obviously, by now we all know the name Lovecraft, whether you read him or not, or you're into it, and you know enough about it that you want to see some of these movies get made, and so does Richard Stanley. And I appreciate it that apparently they're so happy with what he did in this movie, even though it didn't get a wide release, that they've already basically greenlit his adaptation of Dunwich Horror that he wants to do next. So he's talking about making this I don't know necessarily a shared universe, but they're going to acknowledge that other things exist. And something about this movie is there are numerous Easter eggs. They mentioned Arkham. One of the characters is named Liviana, which is from one of his other books. And then you actually have the Necronomicon. He actually has the Necronomicon in this. So there's lots of little Easter eggs, and they talk about other things that if you're a big-time Lovecraft reader, you'll catch on. So that's a really neat kind of getting it there. But as far as this movie goes, yes, it is a brilliant take on, this is the third time I'm going to say this here, how much horror the human mind can take, is the breakdown mentally of this family as this is going on is just, it's like that point where you can't believe this is happening to where you accept this is happening, and how do you get out of it? And then it's just like you're just too scared to run from it, and it just is what it is, and you're just ready to accept your fate, no matter how horrifying it's going to be. The body horror in this is some of the creepiest I've seen in a movie. It's not quite like John Carpenter's The Thing level or anything like that. It just doesn't have that kind of makeup effects or anything like that. But I feel like what they use is mostly practical, and there is some CGI shots or whatever. But it's mostly good stuff. But really, the color. This, like I said, I always want to know, what is this indescribable color? Obviously, we can't put an indescribable color on screen. That's the kind of the peril of adapting Lovecraft stories is how much you can put the indescribable on the screen. It is like a purplish pink color, a little violet, but it's beautiful. It looks really, it pops, and it's a way where you feel like it does kind of feel otherworldly, and I really can appreciate that. There are some changes. First off, they do modernize it, obviously, and I've always said I'm against that. I like my horror stories, my movies, to take place before the internet and before cell phones. I feel like that is where you get the best just primal fear out of these kinds of things. So I wish they hadn't done that. But again, it doesn't become such a sticking point because it has the interference with it. The thing about this meteorite is that whatever this entity is that I think in the book, Gardner always talks about how it like sucks the energy or sucks the life out of everything. So they kind of stick with that in that it just makes all technology pretty much useless. Everything, like, it has like this dish that keeps going out. Their Wi-Fi keeps going out. Their TV doesn't work. Their cell phones don't work. So there, you've kind of eliminated that problem right off the bat. And that was a good decision. There are a few changes to the story, but again, this is a 30-page short story that leaves a lot open for interpretation because it is a secondhand telling and it is very short, whereas this movie is just the event. There is no Amy Pierce. There is no one telling the story. The surveyor actually is named in this. It's a little different there. Most of the big moments from the book still happen, though, so I feel like you'll be satisfied with that, and there is lots of other things kind of thrown into it. So I want to do a non-spoiler about this because I want to encourage people to see this, because I would like to see Dunwich Horror. I'd like to see Rats in the Walls. I'd like to eventually see them do a Cthulhu movie, and to great, faithful success. I would really like to see that. So, and anytime I'm going to get more Lovecraft on my movie screen, and I feel like it's done in a way that's mostly faithful, and at least you can tell that they are big fans and they respect the source material, I'm going to be in support of that all the time. So I'm going to definitely recommend obviously I recommend the book, and I'm going to recommend the movie. I think that it was very well done. There were some changes I didn't like the daughter basically being like a necromancer or something. I thought that was a really interesting choice, but it doesn't anything that kind of takes away from the movie. The body horror is turned up to 11. It will make you kind of squeamish a few times. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I don't know who did it. I was going to look that up afterwards, but it's really, for lack of a better term, Lovecraftian. So I definitely recommend you check out both. And I'm hoping to find, if this guy Richard Stanley does make the Dunwich Horror, that does find a way to kind of tie these into the same universe, and we get kind of a little mini shared Cthulhu mythos going on the screen here, because that would just be something that I'm really, really on board for. So anybody that's going to take the time to make Lovecraft and make it faithful and not just make it over the top ridiculous or some kind of narrative on Lovecraft's very, very questionable personal beliefs, I'm all about the source material. The source material is what matters to me, not anything about the people's personal lives. And I felt like this was done very faithful in a way that will have fans pretty much pleased. I feel like where we are right now, this is about as faithful of a Lovecraft kind of telling as we're going to get. Because I feel like everything else will be like not enough action. We got to throw in some over-the-top special effects and action sequences and stuff like that. Where this is the slow burn that the book is. If a 30-page story can be a slow burn. So again, guys, recommend the book, and I recommend the movie. If anything, watch it on the biggest screen possible so you can see all those colors, because it really pops. So let me know, guys. Have you read The Color Out of Space? Drop in the comments. Let me know what you think. Have you seen the movie? Drop in there. And guys, watch out for spoilers in the comments. I allow spoilers in the comments because I want to talk to you guys about it. So hit me up there, guys, and I'll see you then.